Muhammad Ali secretly walks into his own restaurant, stops cold when he hears a server crying. What he discovered that night would expose a dark secret that had been destroying his employees' lives for months. The confrontation that followed would prove once again why Ali was a champion, not just in the ring, but in life. If this story shows you what real leadership looks like when nobody's watching, hit that subscribe button and let's dive into one of the most powerful examples of standing up for what's right. March 1979, Chicago's South Side. 2 years after retiring from boxing, Muhammad Ali had channeled his passion for community into something unexpected. Champion's Table, a soul food restaurant that had quickly become a neighborhood cornerstone. It wasn't a vanity project or some celebrity side hustle to burn money. Ali had spent months perfecting the menu with local chefs, hiring from the community, and making sure his restaurant was a place where both working families and business people could enjoy an authentic, affordable meal. But Ali also knew that no business, no matter how successful on paper, ran smoothly just because the numbers looked good. The real truth of a place wasn't found in profit margins or Yelp reviews. It was found in the back kitchens, in break room whispers, in the exhausted eyes of employees after a long shift clocking out at midnight. That's why every few weeks, Ali made a habit of walking into Champion's Table as a regular customer. No flashy entrance, no announcement to staff, just a man in a winter coat, baseball cap, and scarf wrapped around his face, stepping into his own business like anyone else. In Chicago winters, seeing someone bundled up wasn't unusual, and Ali had perfected the art of blending in when he needed to. That Friday night, the place was packed. The dinner rush was in full swing, with servers weaving between tables, balancing trays of fried catfish, collard greens, and cornbread. The scent of seasoned chicken and mac and cheese filled the air. The warm lighting cast a golden glow over families, couples, and groups of friends enjoying their meals. Classic soul music played softly in the background. At first glance, everything seemed perfect. But Ali had spent his entire life reading rooms, sensing energy, knowing when something was off beneath the surface. Even when everyone was smiling, he could feel tension like electricity in the air. He spotted the manager first, a tall, rigid-looking man in a black suit standing at the edge of the dining floor, watching everything with the intensity of a hawk. There was something about his stance that felt wrong, not just observant, but controlling, like someone who had forgotten his employees were human beings, not chess pieces. Then as Ali moved toward an empty booth, he heard it, a soft, muffled sound coming from the hallway near the kitchen. At first, he barely noticed it over the restaurant's ambient noise, but as he walked past, the sound became unmistakable. Someone was crying, not loud, not dramatic. The kind of quiet crying you do when you're trying desperately not to break down completely. Ali's footsteps slowed. He glanced toward the break room door, which was slightly ajar. Inside, he caught a glimpse of a young black woman, maybe early 20s, head bowed, gripping the edge of a metal counter like she was trying to keep herself from collapsing. Another employee, a young man in a Champion's Table uniform, stood beside her speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Ali didn't know her name, but the look on her face hit him deep in his chest. Something was very, very wrong, and he wasn't leaving until he found out what. He took a seat in the booth closest to the hallway, positioning himself where he could listen without being obvious. His face was hidden behind the scarf, but his mind was racing. That wasn't just work stress. That was fear. Ali had worked since he was 12 years old. He knew what pressure felt like, what exploitation looked like. This was different. This was happening in his own establishment. The young man beside her kept his voice low, but Ali's ears had been trained by years of listening to corner advice between boxing rounds. He caught fragments. "You can't let him keep doing this. He doesn't own you." The woman's voice was barely audible. "What choice do I have?" He made it clear. "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone. And I can't lose this job. My son is only 6 years old." Ali's hands clenched under the table. His first instinct was to walk over immediately and ask what was happening. But right now, he wasn't Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer. He wasn't the owner of Champion's Table. He was just another customer, a stranger. So instead, he listened and observed. Before he could think further, a server approached his booth. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" Ali looked up, keeping his voice soft and slightly muffled behind the scarf. "Sweet tea, please." "Thank you." The server nodded and moved on. But Ali wasn't focused on drinks. He glanced toward the manager in the black suit, still standing near the hostess station, arms crossed, scanning the room with an energy that made people nervous just by being near him. Then he noticed something else. The young man from the break room had stepped back onto the floor, walking toward the server station. His jaw was tight, his hands fidgeting as he adjusted the order pad in his apron. He looked shaken. Ali knew an opening when he saw one. He stood up casually, walking toward the server station where the young man was organizing silverware. "Excuse me," Ali said quietly, keeping his voice gentle. "Could I get some more napkins?" The young man looked up, startled. "Oh, yes, sir, of course." He grabbed a handful from the dispenser and handed them over. Ali took them, but didn't walk away. He glanced at the employee's name tag. "Thank you, Derek." Derek nodded, but Ali could see the tension in his shoulders. "I couldn't help but notice your coworker seems upset," Ali said, his voice kind but direct. Derek stiffened. His grip on the silverware tightened. "She's okay," he said too quickly. "She doesn't seem okay." Derek swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the manager in the black suit before dropping to the floor. Ali had spent 40 years reading people, opponents in the ring, reporters trying to trap him, promoters looking to cheat him. He could read fear like sheet music. After a long pause, Derek exhaled. "She's not okay," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Ali studied Derek's face, reading the tension in his jaw and the way his fingers kept gripping the silverware. The young man wanted to talk. He just wasn't sure if he could trust a stranger. "Is it a customer issue?" Ali asked gently. Derek hesitated. That pause told Ali everything. "No," Derek muttered. "It's not." His eyes flicked toward the front of the restaurant, toward the manager in the black suit who was still watching the room like he owned every person in it. Derek exhaled sharply, glancing back toward the break room before shaking his head. "It's personal?" "I shouldn't say anything." That was fear talking, not because Derek wanted to mislead him, but because he was afraid. Ali had seen it before. People stuck in bad situations, unable to walk away because of fear, money, or lack of options. He'd seen it in boxing, where young fighters got trapped by corrupt managers. He'd lived through versions of it himself. "How long has she been working here?" Ali asked, keeping his tone casual. Derek responded automatically. "About 8 months." Then he tensed. "Why are you asking?" Ali kept his voice gentle. "Just seems like she's going through something difficult." "Does she like working here?" Derek let out a short, bitter laugh. "She doesn't. But she's a single mom. She can't afford to leave." And there it was, the real problem. She wasn't just stressed, she was trapped. Before Ali could ask anything else, Derek stiffened. Ali didn't need to turn around to know why. The air had shifted, thick with unspoken tension. The manager was approaching. "Everything all right over here?" The manager's voice was smooth but carried an edge of authority that made Derek immediately drop his gaze. Ali turned slowly to face the man. Early 40s, expensive suit, perfectly styled hair. The kind of polished exterior that often hid something ugly underneath. His name tag read, Robert Chambers. "Just needed some napkins," Ali said, keeping his voice soft. Derek was kind enough to help. Chambers didn't break eye contact, even though he couldn't see Ali's face clearly behind the scarf. "Good. We pride ourselves on customer service here." He clapped Derek on the shoulder a little too firmly. "Let's stay focused on our work, Derek." Derek nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Ali thanked Derek quietly and stepped away, feeling Chambers' eyes following him. His mind was already made up. He wasn't leaving. Not until he understood exactly what was happening in his restaurant. He stepped outside into the cold Chicago night, pulling out his phone and pretending to check messages. In reality, he was thinking. The woman, whoever she was terrified. Derek was afraid to speak openly, and Chambers had the energy of someone who thrived on control and intimidation. Ali had dealt with powerful people his whole life. Boxing promoters, network executives, government officials who tried to intimidate him during his Vietnam stance. He knew what manipulation looked like. He knew what abuse of power felt like, and he refused to let it happen here. If he wanted real answers, he needed to talk to someone who might be less afraid. And then, as if the universe was responding to his thoughts, another employee stepped outside for a smoke break. A woman, probably late 20s, wearing a champion's table uniform. She leaned against the wall, looking exhausted. Ali walked up casually, keeping his distance but his body language open. Long night? She looked up, surprised but not alarmed. Yeah, Friday nights are always crazy in there. Ali nodded. I can imagine. Mind if I ask you something? She hesitated but shrugged. Sure. Your manager, Mr. Chambers. What's he like to work for? Her expression changed immediately. A flicker of something dark crossed her face before she composed herself. He's strict, she said carefully. Very particular about how things are done. Is that normal for restaurant managers? She looked around, checking to see if anyone was nearby. Then she lowered her voice. He's not just strict. He makes Keisha stay late, alone, every week. Allie's entire body tensed. She's the only one? The woman nodded. Yeah, and the way he talks to her during those shifts, it's not professional. We've all seen how she looks afterward. Scared, exhausted, like she's barely holding it together. She paused, taking a drag from her cigarette. She has a little boy, 6 years old. She needs this job, and he knows it. Ali's hands curled into fists inside his coat pockets. He had seen this before. Powerful men who preyed on vulnerable people, who used their position to manipulate, control, and intimidate. It made him sick. It made him angry. And it was happening in his restaurant. Has anyone reported this? Ali asked. The woman shook her head. To who? He runs this place. If we complain, we're out. We all know that. Ali's jaw tightened. Not anymore. The woman looked confused, but Ali was already walking back inside. The restaurant was starting to wind down. The dinner rush was over. Fewer customers, fewer witnesses. Chambers was still there, standing near the service station like a sentinel. Ali's footsteps were quiet but purposeful as he crossed the floor. He didn't stop at his booth. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward the break room, where he could see Keisha cleaning tables, her movements automatic, her eyes hollow. When she saw him approaching, she tensed, probably expecting another demanding customer. Excuse me, Ali said softly. Could I speak with you for a moment? Keisha looked startled. I'm working, sir. I can get you another server if... I know what's been happening, Ali interrupted gently. Keisha's eyes widened. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, Ali said quietly. Mr. Chambers, the late shifts, the way he treats you when you're alone. Her hands started trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes. I can't. If I say anything, I'll lose my job. I have a son. I can't afford... You won't lose anything, Ali interrupted gently. But he will. I promise you. Before Keisha could respond, a shadow fell across them. Robert Chambers had arrived, his expression controlled, but his eyes sharp with warning. Is there a problem here? Chambers asked, his voice smooth as silk. Ali didn't turn immediately. He kept his eyes on Keisha, watching how she physically recoiled at the sound of Chambers' voice, how her breathing became shallow, how her fingers trembled. That told him everything he needed to know. He turned slowly to face Chambers, his movements deliberate. Actually, yes, Ali said, his soft voice carrying unexpected weight. There is a problem. Chambers' smile was tight. Keisha is on the clock. Whatever you need, I'm sure it can... Ali reached up and slowly unwrapped his scarf. Then he removed his baseball cap. The restaurant seemed to freeze. Servers stopped mid-motion. A customer gasped. Derek, watching from across the room, went completely still. Keisha's hands flew to her mouth. Robert Chambers' face drained of all color. My name is Muhammad Ali, he said quietly, his voice still gentle but now carrying unmistakable authority. I own this restaurant, and you and I need to talk. Right now. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Customers turned in their seats. Employees exchanged shocked glances. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, that's really him." Chambers blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing. For the first time, the man who had terrorized his employees looked genuinely afraid. Mr. Ali, I, I had no idea you were— No, you didn't, Ali said, his voice still soft but firm. And that's exactly the problem. He turned to Keisha, his expression softening completely. You're safe now. I promise. Keisha stared at him, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't speak, but she nodded. Ali turned back to Chambers. Your office. Now. Chambers swallowed hard, his confidence completely shattered. He nodded stiffly and turned toward the back of the restaurant. Ali followed, but before entering the office, he looked back at Keisha and Derek and the other employees who had gathered. Stay here, he said gently. This won't take long. Inside the office, Chambers immediately tried to regain control. He let out a nervous laugh. Mr. Ali, this is quite a surprise. If I'd known you were visiting tonight— You would have what? Ali interrupted, his voice still soft but now edged with steel. Pretended to be a different person? Chambers flinched. Sir, I don't know what Keisha told you, but— This isn't about what Keisha told me, Ali said. This is about what I saw, what I heard, what multiple employees confirmed. He stepped closer. You've been abusing your position, making Keisha stay late alone, creating an environment of fear, using her situation, her son, as leverage against her. Chambers' face went white. That's not— I never meant— Save it, Ali said quietly. But there was no mistaking the controlled anger beneath his gentle tone. I grew up poor in Louisville. I know what it looks like when someone with power preys on someone without it, and I will not tolerate it. Not here, not anywhere. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling my business partner right now. You're done. Chambers' hands trembled. Mr. Ali, please. I have a family. I need this job. Ali's eyes were cold. Keisha has a family too, a 6-year-old son. But that didn't stop you, did it? He made the call. This is Mohammed. I need you at Champions Table immediately. We have a termination to process. No, it can't wait until Monday. Chambers sat frozen, watching his career crumble in real time. Ali hung up and looked at him. You're done here. Security will escort you out tonight. And if I ever hear that you've gone elsewhere and continued this behavior, I will personally make sure everyone in this industry knows exactly who you are. When Ali walked back into the restaurant, every eye was on him. Keisha, Derek, and the rest of the employees were waiting. The few remaining customers watched in stunned silence. Ali walked directly to Keisha. He's gone, he said softly. You're safe. Keisha's composure finally broke. She covered her face with her hands, her whole body shaking with relief. I thought no one would ever believe me. I believe you, Ali said. And so does everyone else here. Derek stepped forward, his voice shaking. Mr. Ali, we've been trying to help her, but we didn't know what to do. We were scared we'd all lose our jobs. Ali looked around at all the employees who had gathered. Listen to me, he said, his voice gentle but clear. What happened here should never have happened. This restaurant is supposed to be a safe place for everyone who works here. That's not negotiable. He paused, making eye contact with each person. From now on, we're implementing new policies, new training, new oversight. And if anyone ever makes you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, you come directly to me. I mean that. The room was quiet, but the energy had shifted completely. The fear was gone. In its place was something fragile but real. Hope. Keisha wiped her eyes. What happens to me now? Ali smiled gently. You keep your job with a raise. And if you're willing, I'd like you to help us create new employee protection policies. You understand what's needed better than anyone. Keisha stared at him in disbelief. Yes, I would love that. Another employee spoke up. Mr. Ali, this isn't just about Champions Table. This happens everywhere, in restaurants all over the city. I know, Ali said quietly, and that needs to change. Maybe this is where it starts, with us doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Over the next hour, Ali stayed. He spoke with every employee individually. He listened to their concerns, their fears, their ideas for making the workplace better. By the time he left, it was nearly midnight. He sat in his car in the parking lot, watching as employees locked up for the night. Keisha walked out with Derek and another coworker, the three of them talking and laughing. For the first time since he'd seen her, she looked lighter, like maybe she could breathe again. Ali closed his eyes, thinking about power and responsibility. One restaurant, one manager, one employee who'd been suffering in silence. But how many more were out there? He thought about his platform, his voice, his influence. The fights he'd fought weren't just in boxing rings. They were against injustice, against people who used their power to hurt others. Being successful wasn't just about winning championships or making money. It was about what you did with that success, the responsibility that came with it. Leadership wasn't about fame or titles. It was about showing up when people needed you. It was about using whatever influence you had to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As he started the car preparing to drive home, Ali thought about Keisha's son, about how this little boy would grow up knowing his mother had been protected, had been believed, had been valued. That was worth more than any championship belt. In the quiet of the Chicago night, he whispered to himself, if you want to make the world a better place, you start with the world right in front of you. Tonight he had, and tomorrow he would continue.